Hi everyone, my name is Siddharth. Welcome back to my channel Oracle Expert. If you have not seen my previous video about the database fundamentals, you can go ahead and watch it. Like before starting my video, I would like to request everyone to please subscribe my channel and like my video, which would be really a very huge encouragement to post further new videos. Right. So let's start with today's video, and today's topic being entity relationship model. So, what is an entity relationship? Attributes to. Generally, if we hear that, that's as ER. If you are more familiar with the database terminology, you might have heard about ER. ER is nothing but entity relationship, right? So let's understand entity and its attributes. So, what is an entity, right? So, entity means anything which is a real world object having a physical existence. Let's take an example of a company database. Like a company, if I'm talking about a company, it is like an organization which has several structures in terms of departments, right? Each department has a unique name, and the employee who manages or the manager of the particular department. So all these are like hierarchical structure that we see of an entity. Entity here is a company, which is getting further split into different attributes. Like we have a department, we have employees, and how are those relationships actually established. So those things are those. This is how we can describe an entity. At a very high level, it's a physical existence, but the high level thing as a company. That is, we can term it as an entity. Now, an entity can have a lot of attributes, right? So, what are those? Like, try to mention here an example, an employee, right? So here, employee is an entity, and the employee can have various other attributes, like the employee name, the employee age, the department to which the employee belongs. So now these are the various attributes of a particular entity. Now, employee is at the high level, and we need to split those. All details can be stored as an attributes to the employees. All right. So hope that's clear for everyone. So let's move on to the next slide. Now, what is the benefits of ER model? Now, let me put it across like something here. Why do we need a ER model? So, uh, in ER model, if we have an ER model, so we need to document information for the organization, and it will be very clear, and it will be in a very precise format. So that means whatever we are storing, any information, so we will have a structured format, and any changes we are doing in the future, it could be referred, and it could be easily understandable when we are trying to do any changes or we're trying to overhaul everything. So in that point of time, it could be helpful. Right? It's like it provides a clear picture of the scope of the information or the requirements. Right? So basically, like if there's a requirement, we are trying to build up an ER model, entity relationship model. So what will happen is we'll um, we actually create a historical model where we see, okay, this is how these relationships are being established. So it is very clear and very understandable, right? So we can understand, okay, this is how it is related, should it be there or not. And these kind of things will actually help us in designing a database. If we are going in a designer, as a designer, if any individual is going to work as a designer, so these are the kind of knowledge, if they have, they can design a better systems. So that's what I mentioned in the third point, like provides an easily understood pictorial map of the database design. So we are putting across the various entities in the pictorial forms, which will in fact explain how the entity relationship is being described, right? And it offers an effective framework for integration. So what is like once a ER model is created, like it offers an effective framework, right, which can be useful while integrating with multiple applications, right? So when we know that this is how the particular model works, so some of the model we want to integrate with, like we have a lot of things nowadays integration in the sense means like we have websites where we go in and purchase. Let's take an example of railway booking tickets like IRCTC. So we when we integrate with other application, I mean to like the banking side. So when we go ahead and pay the money, this there will be a middleware that will actually direct to the banking side, and the transaction will actually be completed back to the back to the main side. Right. So here how the transaction happens. You can just imagine that. So if we have very clear cut information or a framework, then this kind of integration will be very good, or it will be seamless. Right? So with that we can move on to the next slide. Now, so we have various kind of attributes. So what are those? Let's go through in this particular slide. So here we have first is a simple attribute. Uh, this kind of attribute cannot be divisible further. Like example, a company name, right? So it's the company name cannot be divided further, right? So we have a company name like Oracle Corporation. It's Oracle Corporation only. We can't do much about that. Can't be split further. So it's a simple attribute. Now, what's a composite one? Let's take an example uh, of an address. Like, for example, if you have an address, we are storing our address. So, address as a whole is, we can't say that, okay, this, it can't be stored in a single values. Like, we can have multiple values. Like, for example, we need to have a street name, house number, the road, etc. This all compromises and becomes a address. Such kind of attributes we can say as a composite. It can't be described with a single keyword. Like the further in the previous example for a simple attribute, I said company name. Right? So company name is a single thing. We are talking about name of company. Here address means we need various information. As I mentioned there in example, like street, house number, right? So road, all this information. Right? Let's go to the next thing, that is a single value. So single value attributes is nothing but which sold single value information, right? So it doesn't make much for the divisible like the simple one. So it's we are storing something very singular. We are not storing multiple. Like the previous example, I said house number. House number is a singular value. It can't have multiple. So next is the multi-value. So this kind of attribute, uh, what I can say is having multiple values. Like for example, a person can have a multiple degree, right? For an attribute, college degree, right? A person can might have got a college degree, like for example, they might have become a mechanical engineer, and the other person might have done some post graduation. So they might have done first, um, either they might have done a BTech, then MTech. So all are degrees, right? So we are having multiple values out there. Like you might have seen when you are actually filling in any portals or something like education, they actually tend to ask you to select multiple things. So such kind of information you can see that has multiple values information like I mentioned there. Now what's a derived one? So derived attribute is something like uh, we can determine something. Like for example, if we are giving a date of birth, right, for a certain person. Okay, so if I give my date of birth or store somewhere, so if I want to know what's my age today, of to date, so I can go ahead and calculate that. So I can derive that information from my date of birth. I don't need to store my age. So that information can be derived from a particular information like date of birth. So such kind of attributes are called derived attributes, right? So next on, that's the stored one. Right? So stored attribute is something like I mentioned earlier, right? Date of birth. So which is stored, that is once, and it's a static one. It's not going to change, and not so you can derive your age from the date of birth, but stored attribute is something very static. It cannot be changed, like date of birth. You cannot change your date of birth. So that is always uh, there. So once you're born, you have a date of birth. That's it. Such kind of attributes are called as uh, stored attributes. Let's move on to the next, the cardinality ratios. Now, what is a cardinality ratio? So, cardinality ratio means specifics to the like maximum type of relation an entity can have or can participate. Like I have tried to sort down the different type of cardinality ratios, like one is to one relation, like each element related to each element. Right here, employee example I try to state here is like employee can manage one department, right, and can have one manager. So, can people can understand this, right? So, an employee is a person who's managing a particular department. So, we have one department, and that department can only be managed by a single employee. So, that person is the manager of the department. Now, let's go on for the next one, that is one is to N relationship. Like a supplier, like there's another example I've tried to state here is supplier can do multiple supplies. Like a particular supplier, like for example, a supplier is dealing with computer spares. That particular person can supply printer cartridges. That supplier can supply CDs. Now you can see that. So that supplier can supply pen drives. And generally, pen drives they won't supply much. But anyway, I'm giving an example, right? So that the people can understand mm, how this relationship is actually getting framed up. Right? So one is a supplier A, and that supplier has multiple things like a cartridge or a CD or a pen drive, whatever. Right. So this is how single supplier can do multiple supplies. This is one is to N relationship. Now let's go for the N is to one. So now let's understand, like for example, a spare part. A spare part could be anything, right? So any organization which is a manufacturing organization, so they might be maintaining a lot of spare parts. Like here, for example, let's say the spare part is X, or we can say the spare part as tires, right? For example, in a car company, some supplier is supplying only tires, right? So The car company, manufacturing company, can have different models. So each model of the car may be using different tires. Right? So there may be in a lower version of the model like the hatchback or sedan or SUV class. So these type of vehicles might be using different kind of tires. So we have a number of suppliers and we are supplying one spare part. That spare part is called a tire. So this is how we can make an any-to relationship. Now let's go ahead and see MS2N relationship. Now this in these kind of relationship we have multiple relationships with each other. Now, for example, here I've tried to state like employee can work on several projects and the projects have several employees, right? So in a particular team, there are kind of shared resources. They're working in a shared environment where an individual can work on 50% on a particular project and 50% on the project. So they are in fact not dedicated to a single project, but they are working on multiple projects. Now, this kind of relationship you can see, the individual is not completely dedicated to one project. The person is dedicated to multiple projects. Now we need to store or have that kind of information. So such kind of relationship, you can see that in MS2 and coordinated ratios. So let's move on to the next slide. Now here I have tried to describe some basic symbols of the ER diagram, right? So the first one is a, rectangle one. That is how we try to describe the entity class. Now second one is two rectangles, a first rectangle and another rectangle inside that. That kind of thing, symbol describes it's a weak entity class, right? So weak entity types, like we do not have any key attribute of their own, are called weak entity. Right? Consider the entity type dependent, like which is related to employee. Uh, like cannot exist without for example, consider entity type dependent means like employee can have dependent, like for example the employee can have it, their spouse or their children, whatever. So they are dependent on it. But that particular dependent only will be applicable if an employee exists. So we may have that dependent table in the database, but it will not have the information until unless we have employees. Right? So this is how it's dependent on us. So this type of entity is called relationship, or it's a weak entity. Like there's a dependence on it, which uh, is based on particular information. Like the employee is there, then only dependent can be filled up. If there is no employee, there is no dependence. So that's pretty much clear to everyone. Right. Next is the relationship type. Uh, this defines the relationship between two entities. So next one is the rhombus inside, like the rhombus inside another rhombus. This is called identifying relationship type. Such kind of relationship defines the weak entity type, like dependents are like dependents, as discussed before for weak entity. Right. So next is an attribute. Attribute is nothing but as we said, right? So in the beginning only we have talked about what's an attribute. Attribute is something which describes an entity. Next is the key attribute, the symbol. So key attribute is something which is actually very important or a key in a particular uh, relationship. Like, for example, if you are having employee database, right? So where employee name or employee number is key. So because they are key, and this combination would be definitely be unique, right? So this kind of thing is a key attributes. Okay, let's look into the next one, that is called the discriminator or partial key attribute. The discriminator of the partial key attribute, as discussed above, like for weak entity, the dependent name can have a partial key, as two dependent name can be same, right? So this is how we describe the discriminator. Now, derive attributes, as I mentioned there, right? So an attribute from where we can derive the age of a particular employee can be derived from the grade. Such a kind of attributes is given in that kind of symbol. So multi-value attributes, like it can be like for the entity car. The car can have multiple colors. When we are storing an entity car, and for any model, we can have different colors of a particular car. So those things, a particular car has different variation of colors, red, green, or blue, whatever it is. So that compromises of a multi-valued attribute. So we can store such kind of things. So car is the attribute, car is the entity here, and it could be split into different colors. Hope that's understandable. Now, composite attribute. Uh, this is also we have described or we have discussed before. Um, that is like which could have multiple, like the address. So in the top, you can see here, if it's this place holds an address, so this could be house number, this could be street number, and so on. So this is how the composite attribute, in fact, describes the as a symbol we are trying to represent in this ER diagram. All right, so I think we have reached to the end of the presentation, or to this particular session. Hope this was informational, and thanks everyone for again listening to this video, and hope you will give a thumbs up, and that would be great encouragement for me. Thank you. Thank you very much.